This podcast is brought to you by Delta Neural Health, located in Columbus, Ohio, where non-invasive, personalized care is revolutionizing the way we approach complex neurological issues. With cutting-edge techniques in functional neurology, functional medicine, and chiropractic care, we're leading the way in managing conditions like concussion, dizziness, brain fog, anxiety, POTS, attention, and more. To learn more, visit our website at deltaneuralhealth.com. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Neural Health broadcast. I'm your host, Dr. Coppus, and today we are joined by Eric Morgan of MindWare. Really excited to talk about the technology that you are going to be talking to us about today. So, yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course. So, Eric, first I want to get in before we get too deep into the soft or the hardware and the software of the technology of MindWare. I want to know a little bit about you and how you got interested in this biometric data collection, and yeah.
Sure. Well, it's really cool. That's the simplest response. But looking back, so I am an engineer by training. Went to the Ohio State University, and I studied both software and hardware engineering. And it was sophomore year of college, and I was feeling a little lost. I knew that I wanted to be an engineer. I loved working with uh, with software, with computers, but I hadn't found something to apply that to that really filled me with energy and excitement
Mm.
until I stumbled upon this field of physiological measurement, psychophysiological measurement, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. You know,
Mhm.
the use of the physiological measurement to understand mental constructs, to understand emotions and emotion regulation. And I recall the moment where I wrote my first program where I saw my own heart rendered on the screen in the form of the electrocardiogram, the ECG,
Mhm.
and I was able to change my breathing patterns, expose myself to various stimuli, and see that response. It was so real to see it on the screen and to experience
Mhm.
that. And I just kind of never looked back. That was 18 years ago, and it's the only thing I've ever done. It's the only thing that I really ever intend to do. And the more I got into it, the more I realized just the wide application potential of doing this. It goes beyond just someone going for a run and measuring their heart rate and understanding, cardiometabolic processes and how many calories they burn and things like that. Like that's interesting and great.
Mhm.
But but if we go deeper, if we measure things in different ways, or if we combine measurements synchronously across multiple points on the body, even taking into account environmental information and other systems, we can start to objectively assess things that have been historically very difficult to do that with, something like an
Mhm.
emotion.
Yeah.
And that's just like incredibly exciting to me. I mean,
Yeah.
it's never a dull moment when you're working with researchers or clinicians who are trying to quantify these things that are just historically not quantifiable. So yeah, so that's how I got into it. And yeah, I can't imagine doing anything else.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I got to preview the technology a little bit, and it is
Yep.
really, really interesting and exciting. So I think our
Thank you.
listeners are going to uh, really get a kick out of what you're going to share with us today.
I hope so.
So I feel like the next logical question is, what is mindware and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. So our technology at its core, what we're really known for and what we do best is developing systems to measure the autonomic nervous system. We tend to prefer measuring that from the cardiovascular system, so the heart, because it's a really nice, non-invasive location to assess both branches of the autonomic nervous system at the same target organ. I'm sure we'll
Mhm.
talk a little more about that sort of thing. But so we develop these systems to measure the autonomic nervous system at various points on the body, as well as just general information about the body beyond that. So, what posture is someone in? How are they moving? Because these can all impact how the ANS or autonomic nervous system responds to
Mhm.
the stimuli, to the situation. And for our researchers, sometimes they're interested in how they respond to that stimuli. Other times they're really interested in what's happening in your brain in those higher level neocortical structures. And so we want to remove that motion-based autonomic response as noise because the
Mhm.
signal lies elsewhere. So we develop systems to really help someone understand, what is changing in the body and what is the context in which that is changing. And then what other variables, what other inputs can give us more information? Like where's someone looking? What are they seeing? Uh, we can measure the central nervous system directly via EEG or FNIRS technologies to look at blood flow or electrical activity in the brain. And we can just observe someone's behavior via synchronized audio video recordings. How is someone moving about a room? What are they doing? What is their body language?
Mhm.
Vocally, how are they expressing themselves? And who are they talking to? Who are they with? All of this provides really important contextual information with which we can more accurately assess what that autonomic change means in the context of the research question at hand or the clinical question at hand. So we build the systems to measure the body. We integrate with a wide variety of third-party systems to give us all of that other information. And then we develop software to pull all of that together and analyze it in a way that someone can assess what sort of stress response someone is exhibiting and why. And then of course from like a therapeutic perspective, how can you change that? How can you modulate that in some way? Can you apply a specific therapeutic modality or any sort of intervention
Mhm.
and change the course of someone's stress response and measure how that's changing via the ANS or any of those inputs that I just described.
Mhm.
And a lot of these systems are developed in silos. They're developed by different companies that
Mhm.
don't necessarily lead with an integration mindset,
Mhm.
but that's sort of where we are founded is in integration. Like one of our specialties is coming in and tying all these systems together
Mhm.
so that you don't have to press start on a bunch of places and align data streams later. You just push it once and everything's aligned and everything's in lockstep. And then that makes it that much easier to ask really complicated questions across multiple modalities and then come to the conclusions or your answers with more ease. So that's kind of the systems that we build.
So the idea is you want to be able to, in real time or be able to measure autonomic activity um, as you're implementing a different therapy or different therapy options, and you want to see, okay, what actually has the most profound and positive impact on the autonomic nervous system. That's data that we
Yeah,
can we can extrapolate. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that could be, a manipulation like on a tilt table. So you're changing someone's
Mhm.
posture, so you're manipulating their body in a way that the ANS should respond in a specific way, and you can objectively assess whether it is or not. Or
Mhm.
it could be in talk therapy, because
Mhm.
again, it's not just these, kind of more mundane orthostatic stressors that cause autonomic nervous system to change. It
Mhm.
can be a psychological state. And so if you're engaging with someone about a topic in talk therapy, if you could objectively assess what their stress response is in that moment, it could lead you to maybe pull back a bit or push a bit harder,
Mhm.
um, knowing that you're not going to take somebody over the edge and into a place where they can't necessarily have a meaningful conversation anymore.
Right.
Just more information for the person in real time that's providing any sort of therapy
Mhm.
is certainly beneficial.
Yeah. And I know we on the podcast we do talk a lot about the autonomic nervous system and just conditions that can be um, can result as a result of dysregulation in the autonomic nervous system. But just for any listener
Sure.
who may not, be aware of what that actually is and why it's important, can you just break that down for them
Yeah.
first, foremost? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So the autonomic nervous system is this vast network of nerves that runs throughout your entire body. So it has endpoints in the brain, certainly, but then it touches every organ in the periphery. It touches your skin, your heart, your lungs, your intestine, your bladder, even your immune system. There are endpoints for the autonomic nervous system, both afferent and efferent, meaning it's bi-directional communication pathway. It's not just the brain communicating to these places. It's the organs and the immune system communicating back to the brain. And there are actually more of those afferent connections back to the brain than there are the efferent in the body. And uh, and so it touches everything. And it's referred to as the autonomic nervous system because a long time ago, when the phrase was coined, it was assumed that it behaved completely autonomously.
Mhm.
And for a lot of situations, it does. Like I use the example of a postural shift. If I'm seated right now and then I stand up, my body has to react to this change in gravitational forces, in distances between endpoints when it comes to blood flow to basically keep me conscious so I don't pass out, right? Because we need to
Mhm.
keep blood flowing to all the places that need blood. And so I don't think about making those changes when I stand up.
Yeah.
There are sensors throughout our body that tell the brain that this is happening, and then the brain says, "Okay, I better do X, Y, Z. I better, increase blood flow. I better increase blood pressure, increase heart rate momentarily to react to this new state of being."
Mhm.
And then afterward, I can relax. I can pull back a little bit, take the foot off the gas pedal, so to speak, and replenish the energy that I use to make that postural shift. And and so I don't think about those. But then we've learned over the years that there aren't just those autonomous processes that take place via the ANS. It also comes from higher level brain structures and the limbic system and the neocortex. They can override or even generate themselves uh, changes in the body
Yeah.
that react to totally different stimuli, like stimuli that aren't even maybe present in reality. They're
Mhm.
simply mental constructs. Maybe I'm ruminating about something that happened in the past. Maybe I'm anticipating something that's going to happen in the future.
Mhm.
And from an outsider's perspective, there's nothing changing. And in reality, there is nothing changing about my physical being. But all of a sudden, I have this stress response that's mediated via the autonomic nervous system that is entirely made up. I created it.
Mhm.
So it's not entirely autonomous. We do have the ability to control it to some extent.
Mhm.
Another sort of interesting example along those lines is this idea of, let's say you have a frying pan on a hot burner, it's red hot,
Mhm.
and you touch it, you're gonna automatically remove your hand as
Mhm.
quickly as possible because the pain receptors are gonna say, "Uh-oh, I'm about to hurt myself. I need to remove my hand. Hopefully, I do it fast enough so that I don't lose skin." But if we were to change that scenario a little bit and say you're offered $1 million to keep your hand on that hot surface, well,
Mhm.
now all of a sudden, these higher level brain structures are incentivized by this entirely made up concept of human society called currency that means something to us, but really doesn't mean anything otherwise.
Mhm.
Uh, to keep your hand on this burner and burn your skin in exchange for said currency.
Yeah.
Like, we're able to override those automatic responses, and it's still using the same communication pathways that allow us to do those things, but they're not always autonomous. So I always think it's nice to at least mention that when we're talking about what is the autonomic nervous system. First of all, what does that word mean, and is it
Right.
is it really true or not?
Mhm.
But going a bit deeper, it's made up of two branches,
Mhm.
the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. The parasympathetic is generally considered to be our rest and digest. It's the phrase that people often use to describe it. Generally, higher parasympathetic function is correlated with positive health outcomes. I say generally because it's not always the case. We've
Mhm.
actually learned that folks that suffer from anorexia have a higher resting parasympathetic nervous system, even
Mhm.
though they're clearly suffering from a disorder, and it's
Mhm.
characterized by that actually, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But generally, considered to be a more adaptable state, you want to stay in a higher parasympathetic nervous system drive in general. Uh, the sympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is our fight or flight side, and it's actually more like fight, flight, or freeze,
Mhm.
because freezing can be the same sort of stress response, but it exhibits behaviorally quite differently. And And so this is where we're going into action. We're
Hmm.
responding to either a threat or a situation or a challenge where we need, increased blood flow, increased heart rate. Uh, we need to do something now
Hmm.
to survive or to perform optimally.
Yeah.
And those two branches are sometimes operating reciprocally. And
Hmm.
that's the case for a lot of these, like the orthostatic stressor that I mentioned. You have an increase in sympathetic, corresponding decrease in parasympathetic, and then things balance out
Hmm.
afterward. When you talk about the influence of the higher level brain structures on the autonomic nervous system, you see much more complex patterns of activity where you might see periods of co-activation where
Hmm.
both branches are activating at the same time or co-withdrawal and you don't really know that unless you're measuring both of them,
Yeah.
uh, which is something that we harp on all the time at MindWare is you can't measure one and make an assumption about another because they don't exclusively operate relative to one another. Sometimes they're operating on their own at the same time, and if you really want to understand what's going on under the hood, you need to measure both.
Yeah. Well, that was, I mean, an amazing description of the autonomic nervous system. Probably one of the better that I've heard in a while. So
Thanks.
that was great.
Thanks.
Um, So you clearly illustrated how important it is. I mean, it's regulating blood flow. Is it going to where it needs to go? Is blood going where it needs to go when it needs to go there, right? Do we have disruption in this shunting of blood, at different or inappropriate times, right? That's leading
Right.
to potential symptoms or problems, right? And that's when we
Sure.
get into some of the dysautonomias in the POTS, which we can talk about later. But so it sounds pretty clear that it's an important thing to be able to measure and to assess effectively.
Right.
Now, I know there's a lot of wearable devices from your Apple Watch to your Aura Ring to whatever else is out there, measuring HRV and heart rate, breath rate throughout the day. So
Yep.
these are all pretty, I think, common in people's minds. People are pretty aware of these things. So how does MindWare kind of differ from those? How maybe is it similar? How is it different? And what sets it apart then clinically?
Sure. So with commercial devices, well, there's a number of differences, I would say, and I'll preface this by saying it really comes down to the questions at hand and the scale at which you're asking them. So it sometimes you just for the sake of deploying a device across a wide population, a large population, you have to make decisions that favor costs and ease of application,
Mhm.
as opposed to the perfect data resolution and visibility. So, so for some situations, the thing like the Apple Watches and the Aura Rings, they make a lot of sense for certain things that are being studied. So I'll just preface it by saying that. That being said, there are much more precise ways to assess the autonomic nervous system than what those devices offer.
Mhm.
And with that comes sometimes a bit more invasiveness, certainly a bit more cost, but more clarity when it comes to what is happening with an individual at a given time. So, as opposed to the wrist-based devices and the rings and things like that, which rely on plethysmography for assessing pulse at that extremity, essentially it's a light-based technology. Light reflects off of the vasculature in that area, and as blood flows through it, we have a different reflective property of that light off the skin, and then we get a pulse wave from that. That's great. We can assess, I'll use the terminology pulse rate because it's not the same as heart rate,
Mhm.
although they're commonly interchanged with one another.
Mhm.
And I'll also use the term pulse rate variability as opposed to heart rate variability because again, they are referred to almost as if they're the same thing, but they aren't. And there's a lot of research out there to show that they actually diverge from one another quite a bit during different stimuli, different situations.
Mhm.
But so those devices, that's how they're doing it. They're measuring the pulse at the extremity, whether it's the wrist or the finger. Sometimes you see it at the ear, and then they're a lot of times doing all the processing on board on that device. So you don't actually see what that raw waveform looks like. You're not seeing the pulse waveform. You generally don't have access to the algorithms that they're using to process it because they are proprietary or something of that nature. So it's sort of a black box. And then out the other side, you get heart rate and heart rate variability. You don't
Hmm.
really know how they got there. They're not going to tell you how they got there because there's probably some corners they're cutting to make a wrist-based device that is prone to motion artifact give you clean, stable data during extreme movement.
Yeah.
Just not buying it. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
Because one of the differences is our devices actually expose that raw data. So we collect every sample, typically at 1,000 samples a second, which means that we're collecting a data point every millisecond,
Hmm.
which is pretty important because these things operate, these phenomena operate on millisecond time intervals. You know,
Hmm.
there are milliseconds between subsequent heartbeats. There's milliseconds between the electrical function of your heart and then when it actually pumps blood. And the way that those change are relevant to assessing those branches of the autonomic nervous system. So you have to
Hmm.
have sufficient sample resolution, first of all.
Yeah.
And you need to know what your raw data looks like so you know that the processed results you're getting out the other end are coming from a real source of truth, a valid and strong measure of the signal that you're measuring.
Hmm.
Without that, you're just trusting that the manufacturer of the devices is doing things right, and not making any assumptions that would be dangerous to make.
Hmm.
So we collect that raw data, and then we also like to work our way back the signal chain a little bit,
Hmm.
and collect it at the source as opposed to at the result, where the pulse is the result of the sinoatrial node in your heart causing an electrical signal to propagate across your heart, which causes the muscle to contract, which causes blood to flow
Hmm.
to wherever it is you're measuring that pulse. Okay, so the connection to the brain is not at your finger. It's at the sinoatrial node of the heart, and it's on the left ventricle of the heart.
Hmm.
So if we want to truly measure the autonomic nervous system in the purest way possible, we need to go to the place in the body where we can non-invasively assess how the branches are changing that one target organ. And the
Hmm.
heart is where we can do that best.
Yeah.
So our systems, although we do offer systems that measure the plethysmograph and we offer finger clips and ear clips and things, and there's interesting things you can do with that. More often than not, we're strongly suggesting measuring the heart directly via surface electrodes that
Hmm.
go on the chest and back. And hopefully in the near future, those are no longer wet, gel, sticky. They are, dry and embedded in a garment, which is where we're pushing things.
Yeah.
But we want to get to that source of truth, and we don't want anything in the middle to be possibly corrupting our signal, such that, if we're trying to assess parasympathetic function, and we have two places in that signal chain where the sympathetic nervous system can change the timing, then now we've already lost the purity of our measure.
Yeah.
And that's if you're working with patients who are suffering from autonomic dysregulation, or if you're trying to understand certainly psychological changes happening in someone,
Hmm.
you can't make those assumptions. You can't assume that it's not changing things in a meaningful way. You just have to get back to the source and measure both of them purely.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
oh no, it's okay. So I was just going to mention when I say measure them purely, I feel like I could expand a bit on
Hmm.
what we're measuring at the heart and how those are purely associated to each branch.
Hmm.
So the autonomic nervous system, both branches, the parasympathetic and sympathetic, they both have endpoints on the sinoatrial node, meaning that
Hmm.
they're both capable of modulating heart rate, which makes it a little challenging because you can't just look at heart rate and make any assumptions about what's happening with the autonomic nervous system. Especially because I mentioned there's this opportunity for co-activation of the branches.
Hmm.
So if the sympathetic nervous system is increasing heart rate and the parasympathetic is decreasing heart rate, and they're both active, your heart rate remains stable. So
Hmm.
someone could be having a complex stress response where both branches are co-activating. And if you were just looking at heart rate, you'd have no idea something was happening because it looks the same as it did before the stress response started.
Yeah.
So we have to analyze the data in a very specific way to tease apart the parasympathetic components of heart rate variability.
Hmm.
Uh, and we're really capable of doing that by looking at the heart directly. You can do it at the pulse, but again, it's a little corrupted at that point.
Yeah.
And then the sympathetic nervous system, beyond just having endpoints in the sinoatrial node, it also has endpoints on the left ventricle. So
Mhm.
it's capable of impacting the timing with which the heart muscle contracts relative to the signal to contract. And it
Mhm.
also has the ability to modulate the intensity with which the heart beats. How much blood is it pumping? How much
Mhm.
cardiac output is there? And so we're able to assess that by using a technology called cardiac impedance, where we pass a low amperage constant current source through the thoracic cavity.
Mhm.
And as blood fills and empties from that area, the resistance to that current changes. And so we're able to look at the opening of the aortic valve, the point of maximal blood flow, and then the closing of that valve. And where does that sit timing wise relative to when the ECG, the electrocardiogram, is saying the signal came out to beat? And so shorter intervals between those two indicates sympathetic function increasing, and the longer they get, the lower the sympathetic function of the heart is.
Okay.
So yeah, I just wanted to maybe touch on like how are we getting a pure measure from the heart? That's our preferred method of doing so.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, going right to the source essentially, right? Like cutting out all of the potential interference that you can get between the heart and the finger,
Yep.
or the heart and the wrist to get a pure read. And then the fact that you can tease out with the technology and the readings parasympathetic versus sympathetic activation and activity, that is huge. I think especially in our field, where we're
Right.
trying to tease out and rehabilitate the autonomic nervous system. So is it a parasympathetic issue? Is it a sympathetic issue? What's the interplay like? So I think being able
Right.
to really nail down the differences and be able to see that data and show patients like, hey, look, this is what I'm talking about. Like that's huge.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's great for you as a practitioner because you have that data to then adjust your approach of care. And then it's great for the patient as well to have something visual, like they can see this therapy is changing my body and the way my body responds to these stressors.
Mhm.
And it's changing it, in a positive way that maybe correlates with a reduction in symptoms or a subjective feeling of betterness.
Mhm.
uh, Having that to show it helps someone realize that it's not all in their head.
Yeah.
They're not just, experiencing therapy and then, kind of thinking that it's making them feel better when they're really not. Like, no, this is objectively, you are responding better in these situations. And that can be really powerful.
Yep. It can inform treatment and it can, educate patients. I think that's a
Exactly.
win-win. So
Exactly. Yeah.
one for everybody. Yeah. Um, oh, I lost my train of thought, but
Okay. No worries.
um, so I think when we initially spoke and met, you said that, and you said on this podcast as well, I think a lot of therapists, counselors are using this, during traditional talk therapy, right? And I think
Yep.
as well as in the the research space. So I guess just to play out an example, if I'm the counselor and, talking with my patient and then I see a, huge sympathetic spike during, particular conversation or we touched on something, that might inform the practitioner to lean into or maybe avoid something depending on the maybe the autonomic response. And so I
Yeah.
guess just thinking in that example, is the patient aware of what's happening or is this something that, the practitioner is monitoring only or and then I have some
Uh,
other questions for how I might use it.
Gosh, I mean, so it can go both ways. There's not necessarily a prescribed way. Sometimes it's useful to feed that information back to the
Hmm.
subject or the patient, because they could then observe that and use coping mechanisms that maybe had they've been taught to bring down the intensity of their response to allow them to continue to push through a challenging topic. So, biofeedback essentially
Yeah.
if you see this happening, maybe you start taking deeper breaths as a patient because you want to work through these challenges. Sometimes
Yeah.
your body is fighting you in that because, and your mind is fighting you in that because it's difficult.
Hmm.
But you can work through it maybe if you just recognize this is happening and you start taking those deeper breaths, which is a great way to activate your parasympathetic nervous system It's very tied into your respiratory system. Those deep breaths are gonna cause an increase in parasympathetic function and a calmness to come over you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's one scenario, but then there are certainly other scenarios where maybe the therapist is the only one that's seeing this information and they're making a judgment call based on what they're seeing in terms of whether they should proceed or back off a bit or change course.
Mhm.
And then there's a whole nother scenario where they're not reacting necessarily in real time right away because a person's uh, autonomic responses are highly individual. Certain people have a capacity for greater sympathetic function without going off the rails than others.
Mhm.
We also all come into situations at a different resting baseline. So somebody might be a quote unquote high stress person. It's probably not good for them, but they might be perfectly accustomed and used to operating at a place of higher sympathetic drive. And so you can't use like an absolute threshold across an entire population of people as an indicator that you should or should not alter your therapeutic approach. It needs to be individualized. So, part of really effectively using this technology, I think, is characterizing that individual over time
Mhm.
to to understand, okay, what levels of autonomic change resulted in a breakdown of the therapeutic process during this session.
Mhm.
Okay, this happened once. Did it happen again? Okay, now we have a pattern that we can then consider in the future to use to actually change things in real time. But you're not necessarily hitting the ground changing those things in real time right away because you don't know that person well enough yet.
Right.
Uh, and there are lots of different ways we could handle that through like intake strategies and uh, batteries of exposure to specific emotionally triggering stimuli, so you can essentially set those set points before you ever get into the real
Mhm.
nitty gritty of the talk therapy, and then you have more to go off of.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm just thinking, as we're talking, as I'm trying to approach a patient with some level of dysautonomia, and I have my tool kit of things that I might try to regulate, autonomics based on findings, etc. With this kind of technology, having that real-time data, like, oh, I see the parasympathetic and the sympathetic shifts with this exercise where maybe it's not as powerful with this exercise or this intervention, while we're trying to maybe do tilt table work or whatever it may be.
Right.
Um, so that really helps, I think, as we chart out patient progress, you maybe start seeing even better progress there. And with us, like, what tool do we need to use to affect that change in a more profound way? So I think
Yeah.
that's really, really interesting for our field, especially, which is why I'm surprised that I don't know, it hasn't been it's
Yeah.
not quite in that space yet, but I'm
I
hoping the
know.
podcast just opens that door for you. And
Yeah, I hope so. I appreciate the exposure, but yeah, we've mostly lived in the world of academia
hmm
for our existence. I mean, we certainly branch out. We do some interesting things like with NASA. We're used
hmm
in astronaut training programs. They have astronauts in the centrifuge, so they're experiencing extreme gravitational forces. And of course, you pass out at some point because your body can no longer respond to those G forces, but we're able to capture their cardiac output in real time and feed that back to them so that they can perform different breath work, different muscle activation strategies, focus related strategies to maintain consistent cardiac output for as long as possible while they're exposed to these extreme conditions. So we branch out a little bit from academia in that
Yeah.
regard, but a lot of our folks are, asking questions about anxiety, depression, gratitude, not always all the negative stuff. There are
hmm
people that are studying the act of walking a labyrinth or
hmm
tracing a labyrinth. It's an ancient meditative practice, and certainly people do feel a calming sensation when they do it.
hmm
But they're putting numbers behind it now. They're actually measuring, they're taking people up into the mountains with our mobile device, and they're having them walk labyrinth layouts in these serene environments and just observing how does it change the body? How does that subjectively change the mind? Doesn't matter if it's in this serene environment versus printed on a floor in a gymnasium,
Hmm.
which of course it does because the environment matters sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what makes this endlessly interesting is there are just so many applications for it, and we're always looking for new ways to
Mhm.
apply the technology because the more you know about your body, and it's a it's a powerful system. It has so much to share if you know how to listen to it,
Right.
and that's where we come in.
Yeah. I was just thinking maybe I watched too many crime dramas, but police interrogations, I'm like, I wonder if that would work with a legal.
Yeah, yeah. So we actually, so galvanic skin conductance is the
Mhm.
technology that's used in a lie detector test.
Mhm.
And we do actually, a lot of our systems incorporate that same technology. It is a sympathetically driven phenomena. We measured the eccrine sweat glands, typically at the palms or the fingers.
Mhm.
And yeah, you can assess to a less precise degree the timing of a sympathetic response from the skin via that same technology.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
But
gonna
not
be
admissible in court. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
that's
true.
okay. That's
Yeah.
not our angle anyway.
Maybe eventually. But
Maybe eventually.
no, that's awesome. So you mentioned mobile unit, and then of course there's the I guess the larger unit, the fixed unit, right? So
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about kind of the different types of units, and then what maybe a patient might go through as far as getting set up with the device? How easy is it to put on, take off,
Sure.
etc.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, we have a mobile device and a stationary device. Mobile device is great when you have someone moving around. Maybe they're engaging in some sort of play or task within a room. We do a lot of work with like parent-child dyadic interactions, and so you got kids crawling around on the floor. So the mobile device is great for that.
Mhm.
And then the stationary device is more if someone is going to be in the same place, obviously, maybe you need a higher channel density. So, if you're not just measuring the cardiovascular measures, but you're wanting to look at muscle activity, at blood pressure, at skin temperature, all the other various measures that we can do, a lot of times the stationary unit lets you build out to more of those on the same piece of equipment. But but the wireless unit is nice. It operates on just the standard Wi-Fi network, so you can do it in your coffee shop, you can do it at home, you can do it in your office. And that unit in particular is more geared toward the cardiovascular measures. So we're going to get heart rate variability. We're going to get markers of sympathetic function via the cardiac impedance signal that I described earlier. So we're looking at pre-ejection time,
Mhm.
how long between when the signal to beat is sent and when the blood actually starts flowing, when the aortic valve opens. And we can look at the volumetric measures, cardiac output and stroke volume. So how much blood is actually being moved by the heart on a beat to beat basis. And because it's wireless, you can kind of do it anywhere. And setup, although the devices certainly look different, setup is quite similar for both of them. So we have an array of electrodes today. I do want to touch on where we're heading at some point because
Yeah.
hopefully this is all going to change. But the current structure is we have wet gel sticky electrodes. If you've ever gone to the doctor and had an EKG, same kind of thing, and they're placed on the body at different places depending on the measure. So for an ECG or electrocardiogram, EKG, if you're German, we have an electrode on the clavicle. We have one across the body on the lower rib, and then one on the other lower rib, and that's going to get us the electrical activation of the heart. And from that, we can calculate the heart rate variability statistics, get that parasympathetic function understood. Then when we add in the cardiac impedance, it's an array of four electrodes. There are two on the front of the chest. One goes right in the jugular notch where the collarbones come together, and the other sits right in the xiphoid process, so right at the base of the rib cage. And then along the spine, just outside of those two electrodes, we have the electrodes for injecting that constant current. And sometimes it can sound a little scary, but it's a low amperage constant current. You have no idea that it's actually happening.
Mhm.
It's used in pregnant women, it's used in babies, it passed all of the medical certifications that would allow it to be used basically anywhere. So,
Mhm.
we don't normally go to the extent of describing all the details to someone when they're hooking them when we're hooking them up. But if you are describing the fact that they're passing a current through their body, it's usually helpful to be able to say, yes, this is completely safe. There are no
Mhm.
known conditions where this wouldn't be safe.
Mhm.
All is good. So those electrodes are placed in the body, and then lead wires run back to a device that is hip worn, and that is where the data is collected. And then you can send that data wirelessly to a computer that's on the same network, where you can visualize the data. You can annotate it with event markers. So we like to automate this as much as possible, but if you see something happen or you want to notate that a particular task is starting or a test or some sort of therapy is starting, you can mention that in the data and then recall it later so you know what period of time you're looking at.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the mobile unit and it can capture motion as well. So obviously motion changes how your body is responding to said motion, and so it's important to understand how the body is moving at different times,
Mhm.
uh, so you can properly interpret the signal. So you're always going to get that information from the device as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And then from like a software perspective, like I said, we're integrators. So we can play nicely with systems that collect EEG or systems that collect blood pressure. There are many ways to get all of that data in lockstep with ours, whether it's through synchronization pulses or time markers, or actually bringing their data into our system and collecting it straight there in the same file. It really just comes down to what are the questions you're asking, what are the data streams that you think you need to answer those questions, and then how can we tie it all together nice and neat.
Yeah, love that. So as a practitioner, something else I'd be thinking about is, how easy is it to read in real time? Like, can I get
Sure.
that real time data? Can I process that information immediately so that I can adjust course? So that would be
Yep.
that question there.
Yeah, totally. So that data, like I said, is being sent from the unit in real time to
Hmm.
the computer. There's something like a 50 millisecond latency, just as we bundle up enough data to like send across the network.
Hmm.
So for all intents and purposes, it is as real time as it gets. And you're seeing the full waveform on the screen. And so from there, you can do all sorts of processing. You can detect beats on the ECG waveform, and then from that, you can get heart rate changes. You can get heart rate variability changes. And then in terms of the sympathetic side, it's kind of the same deal. You can detect the key landmarks on that waveform. A lot of times we actually use something referred to as an ensemble averaging approach. So the ECG signal, if you're collecting it well and you have good electrode placement and everything,
Hmm.
it's really easy for us to identify the timing of a beat. But the impedance waveform sometimes can get a bit trickier. And so we'll use the ECG as an anchor point, and we'll look a certain number of milliseconds on either side of it, and then grab the corresponding impedance waveform in that period of time, and then just average it over a certain number of cycles or a certain number of seconds. And that
Hmm.
gives us this really nice depiction of the average cardiac cycle within that time period. And with that, we can more easily in real time assess, how are the timing intervals changing between those two, which is going to give you your pre-ejection period, and that's going to be your sympathetic marker.
Hmm.
And of course, we can also extract respiration and things like that. Respiratory rate can be of interest, certainly as well. But yeah, it all kind of just shows up on the screen. You just need to tell the application what it is you want to, what's important to you. As a research forward development company, we don't tend to prescribe what people need to do. We tend to keep a lot of it up to the user, and then because a lot of people want to do a lot of different things. So you're not going to click a button in Biolab in our application and just get our HRV data. You have to set it up, say, this is what I'm interested in. This is a signal in which I want to uh, uh, analyze to get there, and
Hmm.
this is how I want to do it. And so you have full control over that entire signal chain, signal processing chain. And then at the end of the day, though, you still end up with your metric that you could be looking at in real time
Hmm.
to make informed decisions. And then it's all committed to a file as well. So a lot of our folks, they're looking at it in real time, but then they're also looking at it in post to allow for a deeper dive into what exactly was happening, how did the body respond. to perhaps inform the next stage of care or to just better understand any sort of phenomena that they're trying to understand.
That's great.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Um, you mentioned that things may be changing, getting away from the kind of the wet, the pads.
Yeah.
Can you share with us where things might be going?
Yeah, so this has been a dream for a long time. And for a long time, the uh, technology, the dry sensing technology, was not advanced enough to get the data quality that we know we need in our application. So we couldn't do it. But a few years ago, we realized that dry biopotential sensing electrodes uh, are sensitive enough and flexible enough that we could measure cardiovascular autonomic function using them instead of wet gel dry or wet gel sticky electrodes. And so we proceeded to start down this path, which is coming to an end, or at least a checkpoint, of building a shirt, a true wearable that
Hmm.
is non-invasive, it's discreet, it's an undergarment, similar to a compression shirt you might wear when you're exercising, but it has these dry sensors embedded in specific locations that all terminate in one location where you snap in a module. So there's no wires in the entire system. The closest thing we have to wires are wires that are actually printed, embedded into the garment, but they have the same flexibility, the same feel to them as the garment itself. So they're essentially invisible to the person wearing it. And with this, we've found that we can assess all the metrics that I mentioned today from the cardiovascular perspective with as great of detail as we can with the traditional method of the wet gel sticky electrodes.
That's
So
awesome.
very exciting. Opens up a whole new world of possibility from, just from a setup perspective. Like if you're bringing somebody into an office, it's a lot
Hmm.
easier to tell them to put on a shirt than it is to have them put all these electrodes on their body and then have to rip them off later.
Yeah,
I mean, we have adhesive remover pads to make that less painful, but I mean, if you're working with kids, like my daughter, if I put a band-aid on her somewhere, that thing is not coming off until it falls off by natural causes.
yeah.
Like she's not letting me pull that thing off.
I'm also
Nobody
thinking,
likes having that
right.
happen.
Right. And I'm also thinking, high level performance enhancement too. Like, can you measure autonomics as somebody, is training for the Olympics? Like, when is it time
Yeah,
to rest? When is it time to push?
yeah,
Stuff like that. Like,
absolutely.
when is maybe they sustain an injury and things are looking kind of funky in the autonomics now. Maybe it's time to, maybe they sit out the rest of the game. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of potential for that.
Oh yeah, there's
All
tons of
levels.
sports potential, both during activity as well as like pre and
Hmm.
post,
Yeah.
prep for a competition and then recovery from said competition, all about
Yeah.
that mental game.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think there's potential in both of those components of sporting competition.
Yeah.
And then just like longitudinal data. So imagine like we come back to the talk therapy conversation, instead of having to work out those individual set points during active talk therapy sessions in which, like you'd really rather know that information by the time you first have a conversation with somebody, but
Hmm.
you can't know until you start to measure it, right?
Hmm.
Imagine if you could just send somebody home with
Yeah.
the shirt and with the device and they're living their day-to-day lives. It's messy. There are all kinds of stressful situations that happen.
Hmm.
Uh, but we're able to assess the autonomic nervous system in such a non-invasive way that it's not disruptive to their lives for them to wear this for 2 weeks
Yeah.
prior to the first time they ever step foot in your therapy office.
Yeah.
And by then, we've witnessed these moments of sympathetic activation.
Hmm.
We've used uh, momentary assessment technologies via like a phone app to ask them when these happen, like what's going on with you right now? Where
Yeah.
are you? We have other systems in place on their body to know that they didn't change posture. So something else happened, and we want to know why. And all that time, we're building this profile, an individualized profile for a person, so that we know that when they had this particular stressful situation happen, they had a fight with their significant other or something, we saw this stress response. So when that topic comes up in conversation, and we start to see a similar stress response, we know maybe where they're trending and how they're going to respond to that before
Hmm.
we ever get there. So tons of interesting things we can do if we could
Yeah.
get this out of the clinic and into the real world.
Oh yeah. I think the future is bright for MindWare. There's a lot of interesting things on the horizon for this technology, I think. People have a thirst and have a hunger for this kind of
Mhm.
data.
Right.
As we get more and more into more and more aware of our bodies and the nervous system and how that all affects everything that we do, how it's
Yeah.
so intertwined in everything we do, obviously. So I think there's a lot of really cool applications that you're going to be able to dip your feet into.
Yeah. I
Um,
look forward to it. Yeah.
yeah. And we are running a little bit close to time, so I want to
Sure.
give you a chance just to give our listeners any final thoughts, any final insight on the future of Mindware and yeah, whatever else you have.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in terms of the future of Mindware, we're calling that system's called Nervy. That's what we're referring to it as, and it's slated to come out later this year. So in the fall timeframe, we'll be
Mhm.
hopefully shipping the first production units.
Cool.
In the meantime, we do have prototypes, and we're always looking for folks that want to get involved earlier, maybe to test an idea. At this point, we're looking to test it in as many situations as we can. So if my contact info is a part of the show notes or what have you, I'm
Mhm.
happy to have those conversations and explore different ways in which we can work together to test the stuff out. And then in terms of other parting thoughts, I mean, like I mentioned at one other point in this conversation, our body has a lot of information to share,
Mhm.
and it would benefit all of us as a society to become more informed about our bodies and more in tune with our emotions and our states of being.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that there's a number of conflicts that could have been avoided or at least reduced in significance if we had better ability to regulate our emotions.
Yeah.
And the autonomic nervous system can provide some insight into our ability to do that and can give us the
Mhm.
tools to objectively change that, to recognize that and to change it. I encourage people to be curious and explore these, whether you're using a Fitbit or, a
Mhm.
nervy system, because, uh, the more knowledge we have, the more power we have over our experience on this planet.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone does that.
Well said. Well said. And we will definitely put your contact information in the show notes. But can you also just verbalize that for us, how people can, get in touch
Yeah.
with you or stay informed with Mindware?
Yeah, so our website is mindwaretech.com, and you can check out their news. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for. We run a lot of webinars, and we run a seminar every year at different parts of the country. This year, we're going to be in Chicago running a seminar all about the autonomic nervous system, and we bring in experts uh, to really go deep into it over a 3-day period. So you can always go to the website to check out what's going on. And then my email address is emorgan@mindwaretech.com.
Cool.
And I'm always open to hearing those ideas, so send them my way.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you more. Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome, Joseph. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. And I look forward to getting you back in the clinic here soon and yeah, trying it out again. So,
Yeah, sounds
all
good.
right. Well, for everybody listening, take care.